So here we are using a previous HardOps in a previous version of Blender. Under the HardOps button, you can go to the drop down, and under the opt-ins, you can choose to have your Array V2 start you off in Array V2 in 3D mode. So if we were to draw a shape, shift live, and we look at it from the side, and we press Q and we go under Array, and we attempt to move it, we see that we're not able to move it despite being on the correct axis, and we end up having to rotate the view in order to move it. This is something that I know is completely avoidable in 3D mode, and it's just been variable, so it's something that we also want to resolve once again in this update. So by jumping over to the current version, where I'm using HardOps 987.12, we'll just draw a box with Boxcutter, shift to live, look at it from the side, and under the HardOps button, we just want to make sure that we're under Array V2 under 3D, and whenever we press Q and we use 3D, we could press X and change the axis, and we see that we're now able to manipulate this from an orthographic view. Not a big deal, it's just something that was supposed to have been done last version, but there was unfortunately some sort of mishap that caused it to be an issue. Here we are looking at a top view. We're able to add another array, press X to change our axis and move it in 3D view, and then move out and we see that everything's performing as expected. Another concept about the array worth discussing is the Deadzone circle. So basically we have this array already set up with this object. If we press Q and we go into Array V2, we see that the cursor has a circle around it. And basically the moment that I move the cursor outside of the circle, it breaks the circle and I begin adjusting the array. And the purpose of the Deadzone circle is to allow users to have a moment inside of array to either press tab and bring up their UI in order to go and make adjustments that way, which allows you to break the circle because it pauses the experience, or to allow you to go inside of array and just quickly adjust the count without disrupting the distance at all via mouse movement. It would be kind of traumatic if every time you went inside array it began adjusting it automatically based to your cursor, and that's the reason that the Deadzone circle was added. However, the Deadzone circle does have issues. Here we're using a previous version of HardOps, so for this I'm just going to go under Mesh Tools and just click on Radial Array to create a radial array. And now we have a radial array, which is a different type of array. As we see, it's a array, but it also uses an empty as a driver for dealing with the displacement. So that means if we press Q and we go under array, everything's fine here. We're able to roll the wheel and actually adjust things, and that's actually great. But the moment that we break the circle, things get out of control and we start actually displacing the array itself, which isn't the way that we should deal with radials. But the whole goal is to be able to adjust all sorts of arrays inside of Array V2, even if they're not the type of arrays that are typically associated with V2. So I'm just going to select this empty and press X and delete that, and we'll just create a new shape and we'll shift it to live and just put an array on it. And this time I'm going to press Shift E in order to exit with an empty target. And this means that now I have an empty target that I can move afterwards to further adjust the array in case I want to adjust the distance more precisely, dealing with snapping systems that are unassociated with array, like edge snapping and vert snapping. If I want to snap this particularly here or along this edge or something like that. However, if you were to select this object and go back in to adjust your array, the first thing you notice is that your empty is gone, and we did our best to attempt to keep the distance that you had specified by the empty, but the fact that the empty is gone means that once you exit this, there's no way to properly adjust it in the way that you were able to previous. So that's one way that you can have an issue with array and dealing with Array V2 on a relaunch. Another way is we'll bring in another box and let's just create an array, and for this one we're just going to press E, which gives us a different type of empty driver. This driver allows us to rotate it in order to adjust the count. It also allows us to move it back and forth, but the best part is that it also places it at the end of the object, and it's just using driven parameters to adjust the empty. And what I mean by driven parameters is that everything is purple, meaning that it's getting its differences based off things that are happening with this particular empty. So this also means that if we press Q and we go into Array V2, that everything just breaks down. We're able to adjust the count and that's great, but we've lost our empty, and so that's something I consider a bit of an issue. So here, let's bring up the current version of HardOps, and we'll just press Control N, make a new file, and using Boxcutter we'll just create a quick box and press Q, go into array, roll our wheel, and let's just press E and exit with an empty driver. And typical scenario, I showed it just previously. If we press Q and we decide to adjust it, we see that the empty still disappears, and that's because you're using a driven empty in order to go in and try to adjust array settings, which just isn't going to play. In fact, this type of empty isn't actually adjusting the array parameters like you were seeing before where they were all purple, this one actually just places an empty in the offset field, which is a very simple way to deal with the array targeting. But for this type of system, you can go in and actually adjust the array, and we see that it doesn't actually destroy the empty. But if we were to go inside, adjust the array, and press E to get a regular empty, we see that it's not only in the wrong place, but it's also placed on the other side of the object. But it also gives us a level of control that we didn't have previously, because we're now able to rotate, adjusting, just showing the level of functionality goes with this. If we select this shape and we adjust it, well, now we see that we actually lost one of our empties. So let's press V, bring this object back out, and we'll just press E and set up our example properly. E again, there we go. Now we have our empty. So this one's the previous empty I was discussing, the one where when you rotate it actually adjusts the count in between. This one is the one that's actually driving all the parameters of this particular array. So that means if you go inside of it, we are going to remove all of that stuff, because it's a driven object. You should be adjusting it from object mode, not inside of array v2. But if we were to press Shift E and actually exit with our target empty, you know, the much simpler version, you now will be able to go inside and actually adjust the count, and it won't destroy your empty. And this goes a step further too. Let's select this and the empty and delete it and create a new object. And for this one, we are going to just radial array it. And so radial array was one of those things I was showing previously where we would actually destroy it. Now you can actually load array v2, and when you're inside the dead zone circle, you are able to roll the wheel and adjust the count, and it won't actually destroy the radial array or mess with any of its parameters. But the moment that you jump outside the circle, it is going to begin changing things. So keep that in mind, of course. But just letting you know that there has been improvements made with Dead Zone Circle and its behavior with doing destruction while you're inside the circle. We're trying to actually reserve that sort of behavior for when you're outside of the circle.